Hi everyone. Thanks so much for tuning into the Digital Writers Festival Emerging Editors panel. Despite the fact that the US presidential election coverage is currently airing, who's to say what's more important? We're all a bit nervous over here, but that's all right. We'll continue on regardless. So for the next hour, we're going to be talking all things emerging editors. I'd like to just start by saying that acknowledging that the first Australians as the traditional custodians of the continent, whose cultures are among the oldest living cultures in human history. I pay respects to the elders of the community and extend my recognition to their descendants who are present. So today I'm going to be chatting with Alan Varwerk and Ben Walter. So let me tell you just a bit about them first off. Alan Varwerk is the online editor for the literary journal Kill Your Darlings and editorial assistant for Readings Monthly. His writing has appeared in Griffith Review, Kill Your Darlings, Stilts and Writer's Block. He grew up in Grafton, New South Wales, and then grew up some more in Brisbane and now lives in Melbourne. We also have Ben Walter, a Tasmanian writer of lyrical and experimental fiction. His stories have been widely published in Australian journals, including Meanjin, Overland, Island, The Lifted Brow, The Canary Press, Griffith Review, and many other publications. He has twice been shortlisted in the unpublished manuscript category of the Tasmanian Premier's Literary Prizes and was the guest editor for Overland's recent anti/dis/un-Australian fiction issue. Oh yeah, my name is Lucy Adams and I'm the editor of VoiceWorks. It's a print literary journal that features fiction, non-fiction, poetry, art and comics by people under the age of 25. So if you have any questions for us, just tweet at #DWF16 and we'll try and get to them at some point. Rightio, thanks for being here, people.
Good to be here. Nice to talk to you, Lucy. And Al.
Yeah, nice to talk to you.
Maybe we could start off by just giving everyone a bit more context about who we are and how we found our way into editing. Alan, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll go first. So I'm the online editor for Kill Your Darlings. I've been there for about now. I started at the beginning of the year as deputy online editor, and then editor in around July. Before that, I've interned with Griffith Review. I've graduate diploma, and just freelanced and proofread, that sort of thing. I started out, like more doing creative writing, and that's what I studied in my undergrad and all of that, and then kind of realized that I wasn't productive or prolific enough to be a writer, and writing sucks and it's terrible, and I thought I enjoyed working with other people's writing and making other people's writing better than doing my own, because my own wasn't as prolific enough. So that's sort of how I went more into editing and then into that sort of area.
Cool.
As for me,
Ben?
yeah, sorry. We'll get the hang of this conversation as it applies across these three directions. Look, Tasmania isn't the cultural desert salvaged by Mona, as the narrative often goes. But what's often been the case down here is that because you see a lot of movement to mainland and international contexts, when people are either just before uni or just after uni, you don't necessarily have a great energy of new projects that are arising or being developed at any one time, particularly for newer or emerging writers. So I think my initial editing came out of an attempt to fill some of that gap. Probably 11 or 12 years ago, I was a writer working down here. I was conscious that there weren't a lot of opportunities that I'd had. Just every now and then something might come across in a local context. And so I started out doing some editing back then. And what it's traditionally been over the years is either one-off projects, which are interesting, or which I see as being an opportunity that might not otherwise be there. So whether it be publishing a book, as we did a few years ago, which was an anthology of Tasmanian writers and craft artists, or it's finding other avenues to either promote the kind of writing that I'd like to see happen, like through the Overland thing, or smaller opportunities that aren't completely going to detract from my regular creative practice, and yet at the same time provide that leg up for somebody who otherwise might not get it down here. So I guess that's where I come from initially. How about you, Lucy?
I did an arts degree and sort of came out of it, like faced the abyss of having to make choices. And then originally I grew up in Perth. I had like no idea what was going on. Like, it wasn't even aware that there was like a literary sector or like a cool, like, I don't know, literary scene. I just sort of stumbled upon VoiceWorks and joined the editorial committee. And I was always someone who was interested in writing and interested in words and interested in like creative stuff, and never had any like ambition to edit at all. But it was sort of through the process of joining the editorial committee that I realised that like I really loved it. And after 2 years of doing that, people were like, you should totally like apply for the editorship. And for a long time I was like, no, I couldn't do that. I'm terrible. But I did, and I got it, and like now I really love it. And yeah, so it sort of happened very organically, and I've never had any like formal training or anything like that. I find it really interesting what you said before, Ben, about these sort of 3 different aspects. I should close my email so that noise doesn't happen. Never stop editing. There we go. The 3 different aspects of what you consider to be your role as an editor. There's sort of the more curatorial strand, the sort of more mentorship and providing a platform for writers, and then editing as a creative practice, like in and of itself. I guess, oh, we've lost Alan. Maybe I need to, do we need to invite him back in?
I think he's got the link and he'll join us again. Yeah.
I guess I would consider my job as editor of VoiceWorks very much like firmly placed in the camp of the category of providing a platform for young writers and mentorship. For many people, it's their first time like being published ever, and their first experience being edited. So it's very much about introducing them to that process, you know, representing them and creating space for young people in Australia's like literary landscape, and sort of providing them with a source of legitimacy as writers, because we don't commission, we read submissions blindly. We're receiving a lot of work from very young people who aren't quite ready to be published just yet. The role of editors at VoiceWorks is far more to do with development and providing a platform than it is to do with anything like curatorial. And there's sort of this limited scope for, I guess, like curating the content or being experimental with it. It's more about making sure the writer's work is the best that it can be, and like making sure that it's not being sort of launched into the world before it's ready to be seen by people.
Yeah.
How about you, Alan? How do you feel like those 3 sort of streams that Ben mentioned sort of interact with your editing? Alan, hello.
Hello, I'm back.
Oh, yeah, you're back. Did you hear my question?
What was the question? Sorry, I thought you were talking to Ben.
We're talking about sort of the 3 streams of editing and where you feel that you fit within those.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah, so I think, as we were talking about it before, the 3 streams of editing are kind of, there's a curatorial sense, the sense of helping voices come to the forefront that may not have otherwise done so, and then the sense of editing for its own artistic sake. Is that what you were talking about? Is that? Yeah. So I kind of think of what I do with KYD is probably a mixture of the curatorial sense and the sense of helping younger writers and helping emerging writers break through, because obviously there's a relationship that you have to build with writers, and you have to you have to build that relationship, and you also have to there's a curatorial sense as well, where you have to bring good stuff forward, and you have to help good writing come to the forefront, I guess. Yeah. Sorry, I don't know if that's really answered it. I'm a little bit rattled by my internet dropping out, but yeah, I think probably where I sit is kind of we're not as strict as VoiceWorks in terms of our focus on strictly younger writers, like sort of work with a bit more of a broader range, but there's always a responsibility to kind of bring those voices forward. Like if they have something, if a writer has something important to say, then it's your responsibility to help bring that forward and make it as clear as you possibly can. Yeah.
I think it's interesting, Ben, if I like how the projects you've mentioned have really clearly fit in to the streams that you mentioned, and the idea of the Picton Grange Quarterly as something as editing in of itself as like a creative expression, and I think it's something that very few editors have the opportunity to do. And I'd just love to hear a little bit more about that.
Well, I think it's very difficult to do for most editors, because most editors, I reckon, are in institutional environments. So in some sense, the parameters of what the journal is and what it can be are already ordained to some extent by what's come before the journal, how it currently manifests. It's either a print or an online space. It's trying to get readers. It has these particular income sources. Whereas, because for the most part my editing has been projects that I've initiated and designed for a particular purpose, or because I just think it would be an interesting thing to do, or I think it would be a worthwhile thing to do, and I've got control over the process. It's something which means that I can design something very tailored, if I want to what I would call being unpredictably interesting, something which other people aren't doing. So Picton Grange Quarterly Review, for example, is a publication that I only print 3 copies of. It's very short, fits in a DL envelope, and I put them up for offer every few months on Twitter and Facebook, and the first 3 people who put dibs on it, which usually takes just a few minutes. I sell out of a print run every few minutes, which is more than compared to most literary journals. They get it for absolutely free, provided they are willing to offer it up themselves within 48 hours of having received it. So this is great, and I don't know really what happens to the publications. Maybe they just end up down the backs of people's couches or feeding cats, and I don't know. I've got no idea. But it's an experiment in form in some way, which you've got the liberty to do when it's something that you've got creative control over. Whereas, because it's much, much harder, and I don't assume that an editor who's in a standard model literary journal can have that sort of freedom, and that's fine because they're editing in a very different space. But it's nice to have that freedom.
Yeah, and I guess with VoiceWorks it's very different, because you're coming to something, you're inheriting, I guess, a legacy, and your responsibility is to maintain and uphold the values. So I guess there's a very strong ethic that comes with VoiceWorks, that I can't just be like, well, in my reign as editor, I'm going to, I'm going to tear it all to the ground and build it up again, because so much of what makes it unique and interesting is sort of like upholding those values. And I think sometimes working within limits can itself be interesting. It's like, what can I do within these limitations? You know, so as much as sometimes it can be frustrating not being able to mission, it means that those limitations can create something amazing. So like whereas other people perhaps can be like, or other publications can be hampered by the need to like draw big names, you know, to have on the cover, and to sort of like, you know, financial imperatives or whatever. By choosing purely through submissions and reading blindly, it means you're able to discover someone completely new who would never have expected to be published and is really excited to be published. And then it's sort of giving people an opportunity to get a foot in the door in an industry that is otherwise pretty dependent on having sort of building a sort of reputation for yourself or a body of work and sort of being known to people. And that's really exciting and cool. And it's also really fun to edit those people because they're happy to have just anyone like deeply engaging with their work and having someone care about it and like ask them questions about it, as opposed to sort of, you know, giving it a read every now and again, but like deeply inquiring into it, and treating them like a writer. And that's pretty fun.
I mean, that heritage is incredible, isn't it? Sorry, Alan, what were you?
No, go on.
Yeah, I was going to say that heritage is incredible, but and I wouldn't want to in any way to minimise that and that role that VoiceWorks serves. But there's still, I guess, wouldn't you say, tremendous room to, so insofar as the constraints of budget and time and energy allow, to continue and change and develop a publication like VoiceWorks as well, I think. I mean, and there are stories of literary magazines that have done just this. Granter, for example, was a fairly pedestrian, nothing literary magazine for an awfully long time, until I think it's the 1980s. And the Granter is now regarded as one of the world's leading literary magazines. And I think that if we think too much in a maintenance of traditions of form, sometimes that can hold us back in what we're doing with literary magazines. Now, I think lit mags in Australia can go the other era, and often, you know, you can't reinvent, as you say yourself, every editorship, and particularly in a situation like VoiceWorks, where typically, I think, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but editors tend to only hang around for 1 or 2 years as well, which is a completely different situation to if you've got 3 or 4 years to really put your imprint on a journal. But do you think there's space for you as an editor to expand the range of what VoiceWorks does in that regard?
I would love to. I think definitely hit the nail on the head there. The tricky thing is that at the moment it's a 2-year position. So you spend the first year like just trying to learn as much as you can and being like, can I do this thing? I've never done this thing before.
Yeah.
And then, you know, the second year is probably like feeling like you're okay at it. And then it's like a desperate scramble at the end to innovate in some way, build on it, introduce something new, improve something, take it in a slightly different direction. And I just think it just happens by small degrees. Like it started off as just like a small newsletter, and it has developed into a 128-page literary journal. So I think it's that thing of like deciding that, okay, I'm going to change this one thing or these 2 things, and being content that those things will be enough. Because at the end of the day, you know, you're also leading a team of 18 like volunteer editors, and it's largely about making sure they're all supported in the role.
Yeah.
And I think definitely next year I would love to start developing some more of my own, like, I guess, like in terms of like make the creative aspect of my role as an editor rather than just like keeping the ship afloat.
Yeah.
It's something that a lot of print publications are grappling with now is like, how do we stay relevant in the digital age without just like giving up on print altogether? It's like, how do we, and I think that's something that For Your Darlings has been making a lot of changes with recently. So I'd be interested to hear about that. Alan? Is Alan there? Ooh. Okay, no, he's dropped out. Okay, we've been told to keep chatting.
I'd be interested to hear about that from Alan too. So we'll have to come back to that. But so, what would you like to do in an ideal world? What would you like to happen? Say your budget. Australia Council suddenly had all of these coffers filled because Malcolm Turnbull had a change of heart, and they saw all the wonderful work that Express Media is doing. What would you love to do?
Oh my God, the things that I would do. Well, I would like to. I would like to start exploring what VoiceWorks could be online. I think that would involve updating our website so that when you type in VoiceWorks is the first thing to come up. Just basic things like that. But like I think being online is a great way for young people to share their work. I think whilst being in a print magazine is really, really valuable because it lends a young writer an air of legitimacy that they don't get elsewhere. And it means that you have to put in a certain amount of editorial rigor goes into the lead up to print publication because you can't change it once it's in print. To making sure that the work is edited really well. And I think those things are really valuable. And I would never want to give up all the reasons that being a print publication is really important. But I think the ability for like a young person to be like, hey, I was in this thing, and be able to share that with people online, or to have, say, someone in a rural or remote area who, isn't going to walk into a bookshop and buy a copy of VoiceWorks or isn't going to become a subscriber, they can at least get a sense of what VoiceWorks is without having to have a physical copy of the magazine. So I'm definitely interested in just to some extent exploring how VoiceWorks could be in part online.
Yeah, cool.
The other things I almost hesitant to say because I'm like, I have all these things that I do want to do next year, and if they don't end up happening, I don't want them to be this record of all of my precious dreams that crumble to the ground. But I'm definitely interested in doing more interesting things within the print journal as well.
Yeah.
But maybe I'll hold off to talk about those things until I know that some of them are actually going to happen.
That sounds just about fair. Yeah.
Alan, we were talking before about how Kill Your Darlings, we're talking more, I guess, print versus online, and how do you sort of navigate the digital era. Some interesting stuff there.
Yeah, definitely. I'm really sorry about my internet, by the way. It's interesting because it's all changing next year when we go completely digital. But up until now, the print and the online parts of KOD have been quite distinct from each other in the sense that the editing process for online is generally a bit quicker turnaround than for print. The pieces are shorter. The pieces we turn them around quicker. But the flip side of that is with print, you are constrained to, up until now, KOD has been constrained to a quarterly, and what that means. The main reason why we're sort of shaking things up is to break that sort of quarterly constraint, to be able to, publish more, basically more and more often, and still have that sort of, kind of blur the lines a bit between what is sort of, blog content or print content, and sort of blur those lines a little bit more in terms of you can have really high quality stuff that is digital only. I think we're in a place in our kind of publishing culture now where that is acceptable, and where people where people are okay to read on their phone, or on a tablet, or on their computer. I think we're at a point now where you can kind of break those constraints of the book is legit and online is more temporary. I think you can break those constraints a little bit more.
And have you found
now that,
in terms of like learning, like editing specifically for digital on online versus in print, is that something that you learned just through the process of doing it? Like, I guess, how do you learn to make that transition from editing for print to editing for online?
In terms of the way I learned on paper. So the editing and publishing course that I did at RMIT was very much like hard copy editing first. So learning proofreading marks, learning copy editing marks, doing it on paper. And I think that's a good way to learn, because it's the same as handwriting things. You learn them a bit more. They kind of drill themselves into your brain a little bit more doing it in hard copy, and you can go back and refer to things later. So that, in terms of, and it's easier to translate. It's easier to translate a analog workflow to a digital workflow because of the way that these things are set up. But a lot of it in terms of editing for online is kind of, I mean, part of it is editing, but also part of it is you learn go. And I think that's the good thing about literary magazines and online sort of publications, is that learn these things as you go, more adaptable, some of these things. And yeah, I think there's probably going to be more now distinction between editing for digital and editing for print. But I guess, yeah, like I say, editing is editing. The fundamentals are the same. It's more the workflows around it, I suppose, that are different.
Yeah.
What do you think, Ben?
Look, I mean, I think because I'm not a regular day in, day out editor, it's less important for me to have a process that I've gotten to and stuck to, and it might depend very much on the project that I'm working with. I think I have a better eye for things in a sort of printed context and in that sort of practice. Printed something out. I'll often print something out if I really am not sure about something or I want to check something to read it. I don't. I think as well, because I've had the freedom of largely doing what it is that I'm interested in or what I want to do as an editor, as something that's subsidiary to my writing. Again, I've had that looseness of being able to learn as I go and work out what's going to work and what's not going to work. And there'll be all sorts of things that I don't know, just by never having worked in a formal editing environment. And those things probably don't matter too much to a large extent for the sort of editing that I want to do. One thing I was interested in both of you, though, is that you both come from a place where you're interested in writing and interested in words and language at any rate, and yet have made that transition as you've been involved in these industries into an editing role. I'm just really interested in that transition because I think it's an enormously valuable transition. I was just wondering if you could give some insight into how that took place, because I'm sure there are people who are dabbling with writing degrees in some capacity or interning at different literary magazines who are wondering about that sort of a pathway. I'm just interested in how you guys made that transition.
Alan, do you want to go?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah, well, like I said, I started out doing like creative writing, and I think it is just I started out doing creative writing and then basically decided that I wanted to be in the industry of books and words and writing and that sort of industry, but I kind of could see in myself early on that I wasn't enough to do that in a writing capacity, and I would spend probably more time self-editing my own pieces than actually writing. I've never been good at just the brain dump of in terms of like a fiction or that sort of thing. I'm always more of a self-editor in terms of my own writing. And And so the creative writing degree I did in my undergrad, there was a class in that was about editing, and so I kind of took that as part of that course. And yeah, it really just kind of clicked when I was doing it. Like, this is for me. This is my niche in this particular scene. And so and from there, it's kind of internships and kind of hustling as a freelancer and that sort of thing. Proofreading is a really good way of getting into, as a freelancer. If you're starting out as a freelancer, proofreading is a good way of getting yourself out there, because it's kind of the grunt work of the industry, in the sense that it needs to be done. It's time consuming, more highly skilled. There are more highly skilled jobs out there in terms of editing. And that's a good way of sort of showing off your skills to publishers and to people in the industry. Yeah, what about you, Lucy?
Well, I never identified like as a writer. I think I was true at the point where I like started getting interested in editing. I think I was too young to really consider myself anything. I just was, and probably still am, just like a weird, ill-formed ball of something. I don't know. Like, I think I even though now like my job title is an editor, I think maybe it's just like an imposter syndrome thing. Like, I still will be like, am I? It's like, am I an editor? What am I? Ugh.
Yeah. What gives me the right to work with these, amazing writers and put their stuff out there and decide, what is and isn't correct in their. Yeah, I think imposter syndrome is as much a thing for editors as it is for writers, definitely.
Yeah, but it's that similar thing of where like I enjoyed writing. I certainly, as similarly to you, Alan, like I wasn't in no way like prolific enough to be like, yes, I'm going to commit to this as like a career. Like I definitely couldn't hack it as like a freelance writer. I think while I enjoy it, like, for example, since getting this job, I haven't written a single thing aside from my editorials and, responding to like interview questions to go online, or like, like a million emails or whatever. Like, I don't, like, of course, now that I can't because I have no time, I'm like, oh, I would love to write all of these things. But I think when I had that expanse of time to do it, I think I was so riddled with anxiety and self-doubt, and like the idea of like writing is being fundamentally like painful. As much as I loved it, it was like at times it would be quite painful and there'd be an element of suffering. I think because the entire time I didn't know it, but I did have a very strong sense of an internal editor, an internal critic, that whereas some people, as you said before, like, the brain dump, I struggle with the brain dump because by the time the thought makes its way, from wherever it's formed to like, the critical faculties of my brain, it stops at that point before it can be dumped. Like, I have like a self-preventing dumping mechanism that you just can't like. So I think in a way, in terms of how picking up like a more formal editing role has influenced that, I think it's at once enhanced it because I'm ever critical. Like, I've always got my little editor's hat on. So I think it's intensified that in a way, but it also at times has tempered it by making me realize that as an editor, I'm so not judgmental of other people's work. And as an editor, you're not going out, like when you're initially reading a piece, to think about the things that are wrong with it, or things that you want to change about it, or all the ways in which it's just a terrible piece of poop. Like you want stuff to be good, and you want to. You're like, okay, you're looking for the strongest aspects. You want to find the best in, like, for me, it's like wanting to find the best in these young writers and you're really excited rather than seeing everything from the reverse of wanting to see the worst and being judgmental. So I think that has potentially emboldened me to be less self-critical because I know that no one really cares that much. Like no one's going to like look at me and like judge me that much. I don't know. So, yeah, I think it's one of those things where I think so long as I have this job, it's gonna, like, I think it will take up so much time that I will have very little time left for writing. But I'm hopeful that once sort of my editorship comes to an end, that I will feel okay to write more. What about you, Ben? You say you identify more as like a writer first and foremost, and editing is sort of just like subsidiary to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I mean, part of my editing has come just, I guess, through my experience as a writer, and saying, well, if there weren't these opportunities for me, or if there was an opportunity for me, I was enormously thankful for that, for the person who provided it in the Tasmanian context. And so providing people with that sort of experience, as I said earlier, is important, but it really comes from my experience as a writer, saying that, you know, people need to have their leg up, because I've had the occasional one here and there, or at other times I haven't. And so to be able to give that to people is a wonderful privilege. But one of the other strands, I guess, again, that we were mentioning is that I'm really interested in the art of writing. I'm much more of a writer in the creative strands rather than in journalism. And I think that I see my editing as subsidiary to that in some extent. So I could never let editing take over what I do. I know that, like a lot of writers, if you become a full-time editor, or even a part-time editor, it's very difficult for that to swamp your practice. And I've spoken to many people in that boat exactly, who've said, well, they thought that they could keep up the editing and the writing, but the editing very much takes over. So I would be happy to have to be very careful about it taking any more than that. But for me, yeah, the writing is paramount, and I can't see that changing in any way.
Yeah, I think in terms of, I think I agree with you in terms of, yeah, taking up brain space. I think it is hard to. I'm kind of the same as you, Lucy. I've done a little bit of writing, kind of a few articles and stuff, but on the whole, not much writing at all since I've kind of become an editor. And I think it does take up brain space differently. And I think I don't think you can dedicate yourself to being both. I think you have to either, I think you can do both at the same time, but I don't think you can be, like you say, you have to have a main gig you either have to be like an editor as your main gig with some writing on the side, or a writer as your main gig with some editing on the side. And I think both of those are just as legitimate as one another. I don't think there's, and they inform each other in different ways depending on what is your main gig. But yeah, I think it is hard to make enough brain space for both writing and editing concurrently.
Yeah. Particularly if you've probably got another job which is actually paying you the money outside of that. In a lot of cases, at any rate, yeah. Not always.
Yeah.
Yeah, Alan, you said you have like 2 other jobs?
I have 2 other jobs, yeah. So I have 2 jobs as well as KYD. So it's, yeah. I mean, I'm lucky in the sense that, like, I have one job that pays the bills and pays my rent, and then I have 2 jobs that I kind of do because I like them, essentially. So my job with readings and my job with KYD. They're both editorial jobs, and I do them more for the experience of being in the industry and for working with books and with writing. And so I do those because I like them, and I have another job that kind of pays the bills at the moment, which is okay. Like, I don't dislike my other job, but it's not my
Yeah, I think that's very common. Like, most of the people I know who edit do so as a voluntary thing. And even like for me, it's like I'm very fortunate to be paid for what is technically a part-time position. But I also have another job on the weekends. I work at a cinema on Saturday nights. I think partly the reason why I do that is because I feel like for me and for most of the editors that I know, it's so all-consuming, and it's a constant process of like juggling a million things, and you've got to be thinking about so many different things at once. that it's impossible to have any sort of respite from it mentally. So part of me is like, hey, between the hours of like 5:30 and like 10 on a Saturday night, I can't think about that. I have to scoop popcorn. And it's just like quite liberating about not being responsible for anybody, and having a very sort of limited set of tasks to do. But I think it's also a thing where, as fortunate as I am in this role to be paid for what I do, I am aware that like once this job ends, it's a very unique position within the industry. There's no like equivalent, and there's also no natural place to emerge to. Like people often refer to me like, you know, like an emerging editor, like on panels like this. It's like, okay, but once my time with VoiceWorks finishes up, what is the next logical step for an emerging editor? There's not a soft landing pad after this role. There's no like, well, there's the next step up in the industry that is also a paid job. It's like, no, you do this, you're in this position of a like incredibly unique position of creative leadership, you know, like being paid in the arts. This is a very unique combination of things, and there's no equivalent.
I think the way that a lot of I think kind of the default or stereotypical kind of progression is from working in lit mags, for example, to becoming like a book editor for a publisher. And that's like such a, I feel like anyway, it's such a different kind of editing, because suddenly, because you're going from working with lots of small pieces to working on one manuscript for, you know, weeks or months. And I think like I guess that is a place to emerge to, like a regular gig as a freelance or in-house editor for a publisher, I suppose. But it's a different game from working in lit mags, and it's not necessarily one that I want to go to. Like I quite like the lit mag, the kind of paradigm of lit mags of being shorter pieces more often. And I don't know. Yeah, I guess I agree with you. Like where to emerge to, what the next step is from this and from being an emerging editor. And it's actually something that I wanted to talk to you guys both about, was about the idea of, I guess there are like the idea of being an emerging writer is it's kind of a little easier to quantify in the sense of you have your name to things, you have like, you can have a publication history, you can get published in lit mags or in journals or in anthologies or what have you. And it's easier to kind of put those notches on your belt as an emerging writer. And I don't think that is the same for editors, because so much of what we do is invisible by design. And I guess I wanted to hear your thoughts on on how you feel like gaining that experience or gaining those notches on your belt as an emerging editor, how people can do that if they're wanting to do that.
Yeah, it's something that I think about quite often actually, is what we do is fun. It's invisible work, and it's interesting. It's like, I feel like I don't do anything that I do for any kind of validation. Like I just don't really care about any of that stuff. However, building your confidence, it's very difficult to get a sense of just like knowing that you're doing a good job. It's like, am I doing it okay? Am I terrible? Who knows? Like, you know, you release an issue, and the first thing people usually comment on is how it looks and the design. I'm like, oh my God, the design, it's amazing, which is great, because designers do an amazing, beautiful job. And then I'm always like, read it. And then, you know, they read it and then they'll say the pieces that they liked, but no one ever is like, yes, the editorial rigor in this issue was
well edited,
outstanding. And like, they shouldn't do that. Like, obviously, like, credit goes where credit is due, which is to the writers, which is, you know, what it's all about. There's no way to like quantify like sort of career achievements in that way, or reaching or like gaining a new skill. It's not like a video game where you're like blah 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 blah, you've gained a new skill. It's just like
if things are running smoothly, then you're doing a good job, essentially. So,
but don't you think that there's something to be gained in that regard from being attached to institutions or magazines which do have a good reputation?
I think from an outsider's perspective, something like EdCom at VoiceWorks is invaluable for being an emerging editor, because that's something that you can put on your CV. It's a notch you can put on your belt. You can say to someone that you're going to an interview with or pitching to or something like that, I'm on EdCom, and people in the industry know what EdCom is and they know the reputation that comes with that. And I think that is really valuable. Something as well like what Seizure does with the Viva La Novella, where they give as much, maybe not as much, but they certainly give credit to the editors of those books. And even I think on their website they will have, when they put a piece up, they'll put the name of the piece, they'll put the author, and then they'll also give the editor a byline. I think something like that is really valuable, and I think Seizure do a really good job of that. And that's something I'd like to see more of, really. It's something that I think there needs to be support for emerging editors as much as there is for emerging writers.
I think a lot of it too, don't you think, is that if you're not finding these opportunities available within the literary magazines, these sorts of notches as you speak of, there's a lot of merit in doing something yourself and finding a model that's going to be suitable or interesting, or be publishing the sorts of things that you want to do. That's not always straightforward, and money is a big thing in regard to that. But I mean, that's what I've always done. I've published a couple of different things or magazines under Australia Council grants. I've found a model at the moment for a magazine which I can run, which serves a certain sort of purpose, and publish some interesting things. You know, the next issue is going to have just a new Ryan O'Neill story in it. So I'm glad to be publishing interesting things, but also local Tasmanian things. And so for the most part, it's just been doing it. And any institutional stuff that's come about has become off the back of just finding ways and models of doing it. Another example might be something like the Chart Collective in Melbourne, who I know put an awful lot of thought into thinking about how they could make a sustainable publication model for the sorts of things that they wanted to publish, which they didn't see being published elsewhere. They found an online model. They found enough funding through, I think it was CAL, to be able to pay their writers, and suddenly here's something that is actually happening. So the fact of being really, and this comes back perhaps to the creativity in a funny sort of way, even if it's just a question of form or some sort of mouse, is if you're an emerging editor and you're not finding a way to get your work out there, to publish the sort of work that you want out there, then is there something that you can start which maintains the ethics of editing, whether it's paying the writers as required or whatever it might be? And I think, if you find a way to do that well, then that can lead to other things.
I think that's part of those three facets of editing that you were talking about. I think that is where that third facet of doing it like editing as a form of creative expression, I think that kind of is what you're talking about there, and I think that is a really important thing. But I guess like with starting your own thing, like with anything, and part of doing that well is not just start, like, if you're going to start something, you have to do it for a reason. And like you say, if you're wanting to lift up Tasmanian voices or a particular kind of voice, I think that's something like, that's definitely like a gap that needs to be filled. But I don't think it's something. It's definitely like, I've definitely thought of being like, I can't get an editing job, I'm going to start my own magazine, but you really need a good reason to do it apart from I need something on my CV. Otherwise, people are going to see through it. People are going to see it as being self-serving or as not answering a question needs to be answered.
I think it's a thing of thinking about, is what I want to put out, is it already there? Is there an audience for it? Who is it serving? And like, I think a lot of people a lot of young people really want to make a magazine because they want to be a part of something, and they want to be at the helm of something, and they want to get that experience. And it's sort of creating for creating's sake, which is kind of awesome and cool and fun, which I think where zine culture can really play a purpose, because it's low stakes. You don't have to invest all of your money and all of your time into it. You can just have a play, like experiment a bit, and make some just like really cool stuff. Whereas there are some other people who I think aren't quite realizing the burden in terms of time and also financial investment.
Yeah.
Goes into like, like some people starting up like a new print publication. But then sometimes there are gaps. Like, for example, a couple of friends of mine recently started up a magazine for long form Australian music journalism. It's called Swampland, and it was a huge undertaking. They got a grant. They did a possible campaign. So they got money to fund it and pay writers. If you think about it, I can't think of anything that was of a print publication that served that purpose. And they had a response from the public that was like, actually, this is a gap in our literary culture, and you are feeling it, as opposed to some other ones which are perhaps a bit like, do we need this? But then it does become a matter of like, how is this like financially sustainable long term? And I think that's where often like, relying on grants is, so you can't do a possible campaign every year. Relying on grants comes in, or because it's kind of unlikely that a magazine is going to be self-sufficient.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in the sort of last 10 minutes, I kind of one of the questions you kind of threw out in the in our sort of original emailing, I was about kind of the like the ethical and social responsibilities of being an editor, and I guess we've kind of touched on this a bit before, but yeah, I guess I'd be interested to hear what you guys think about the responsibilities that come with being an editor. Like it's like it is fun, it is enriching for us, or for me anyway. But I guess we do have a responsibility to the publications that we work for, and for the writers that we work with, and for the audiences that we're publishing for as well. And I just kind of wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. One of the many questions I asked, and so few of them we've got around to answering. There you go. Yeah, I think there is a huge responsibility as an editor in that you're essentially a cultural gatekeeper, and there's a lot of complicated ethics that go on, that play into this. I feel like I think the whole commissioning versus accepting submissions and reading blindly plays into it, because I guess it's difficult when you're reading submissions blindly. It's difficult to know who is writing these things, and who like when you're selecting who you're going to be representing once those pieces are selected. You're making like the choices you're making. Like they lead to the kind of people you're going to be representing more abstractly, and so I think it's difficult to control. It's a bit more difficult to control. However, I think the important thing is that it could be difficult at times, is making sure that the people who are on your editorial committee are going to be representing. They're not going to do this hive mind where everyone has the same opinion and everyone is going to be sort of selecting the same kinds of work. But that in itself can be a challenge, because the kinds of people who can commit their time for free, who are aware that literary magazines exist, is actually a very limited band of people. So, you know, we advertised positions recently to get on the editorial committee. We got, you know, combination of like intern, art editor, and edcom. We got over 100 applications, and the vast majority of them were people from, you know, certain geographic locations within a certain milieu with a certain kind of education background. So I guess the responsibility on us is ensuring that we increase awareness of what we do. So the people from regional and remote areas, people from all sorts of different cultural backgrounds, know that we're a thing and that we are open to them and that we welcome them and that they don't feel intimidated by us and that we're very inclusive. Because until people sort of know about us and that know that being involved is a thing that is possible for them, we're just going to see the same kinds of people getting the same kinds of opportunities over and over again.
Yeah, I think, I mean, at the level of commissioning, that's extremely important as well. I really thought that was interesting, Lucy, that you're talking about the struggle to retain that in a blind submissions process. As admirable as a blind and important as a blind submissions process is, it can be difficult to ensure that you're seeing that diversity of voices represented. The commissioning side, I think, is really interesting too, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this as well, Alan, because I think one of the things you do notice when you're an outsider, so for me in Tasmania, for example, is how much the networks that people have and the geographical networks that people have are important for people building their writing careers. And the people who are in Melbourne or people who are in Sydney, where the vast majority of the literary infrastructure of the country is based, have enormous advantages, an enormous privilege, to use a very loaded word these days, which is almost never acknowledged in the wake of other very genuine issues of privilege as well. If you talk to the vast majority of people in Tasmania who have young writers, say in their 18, 19, early 20s, who have kind of interest, they would never have heard of VoiceWorks, they would never have heard of Kill Your Darlings. And that's not necessarily, there may be a range of reasons for that. But the networks simply aren't there, and the opportunities to discover these sorts of things aren't there. And I'm sure that's the case in Western Australia, I'm sure it's the case in South Australia, I'm sure it's the case in regional Australia, that there are these talented writers who don't know what the next step is, and they're not going to meet the person who's going to introduce them to the next step because they aren't going to the right parties and they're not mixing with the right people, and there aren't the events that enable this that you would see in Melbourne and Sydney.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's definitely an interesting argument. I think there was that really got kind of kicked off by that piece that John Ravanchet that they published in KYD last year about the Melbourne scene and the Melbourne voice. And so and I agree with you, like when I was growing up in Grafton, I feel like I had a pretty good, like I had a fantastic English teacher and we had a good library and all that sort of stuff. But I had only really heard of like VoiceWorks as a really peripheral thing, and so it was never really part of my experience as like a teenage writer, in sort of regional northern New South Wales. And yeah, so I definitely agree that making yourself, it's difficult because there is that drain from the. Like, it's definitely the case with Brisbane. Like, so many people from Brisbane who are in the writing scene will end up in Melbourne. And so it's difficult to... It's difficult to get outside of that bubble. It's very easy to stay within that bubble, but it's something that we have to be conscious of, and it's something that... And that's the same. That's the same not just for regional writing. It's the same for. It's the same when you're talking about any perspective that's not your own. Like me, for instance. I'm very aware of the fact that KYD has a really strong reputation for publishing a lot of feminist and queer perspectives, and so as a straight white dude, I have a responsibility to be aware of that and factor that into my work, and also be elevating ethnically diverse voices and sexually diverse voices, gender diverse voices, that sort of thing. And sometimes it's hard when you are, you know, when you're working with just certain pictures that you're getting or certain people who people that you know. And so it is, I think as an editor, it is important to be aware of the scene around you so that if a topic comes up, you can commission a piece, or if you see a topic that you like, I know a writer who will be great for this. It is important to be aware of what's going on around you, but I think that awareness needs to be outside the Melbourne, Sydney bubble. And that's why things like the Digital Writers Festival are really good. That's why things like the National Young Writers Festival in Newcastle are really good, because they look outside of those scenes. And I think that's a responsibility that editors or sort of cultural gatekeepers have, is to be aware of and expand our areas of knowledge of the scene of the industry that we're working in.
I think it's like we're always, our resources are always going to be limited. And in an ideal world, everyone would know we existed and jump on board. But until that point, it's like we just have to continue to be mindful and continue to be aware of it and do that work and make active steps so that things will improve and it doesn't things become less insular. Because I totally agree. Like growing up in Perth, I had no idea about just any of this stuff. And even now, there's part of me that's like jealous of people who like grew up in Melbourne and like are like naturals. They were like born culturally literate and I wasn't, and I had to learn it once I was already an adult. And like I'm behind. Like I don't know what I have to like develop taste in adulthood, and rather than just have it as this. Like, I know people who have just been, reading amazing things, and some members of EdCom, one guy was submitted and was published for the first time when he was 16, and I'm like, man, when I was 16, I was like hanging out in the park in a tunnel slide. Like
that experience will make you better at it all in the long run.
So yeah,
I guess it is. I guess it is just the fact that it is. Yeah, it's work that we have to do. And it's difficult when we are doing, when we have other jobs as well. When kind of just editing is taking up sort of time, so we have to juggle all these things. But yeah, I guess it's just something that we need to be conscious of, I suppose.
Well,
wrap up.
I just realised we're past 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
There we go. Man, we could just natter on forever about this.
Yeah.
Interesting chats to be had around this topic. But I guess, thank you so much for anyone who's tuning in. I hope that hope the election is going okay. Thank you both for having a chat with me.
Yeah, thank you both as well. It was great.
Yeah, thanks, Lucy. Thanks very much. And thanks to everyone who tuned in. Thanks, Jane, for an amazing festival. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Doug. Do we just